Inside the Beltway. Well, my friend Carol Platt-Liebau has been running the Yankee Institute in Connecticut for a long time, and she said, don't sleep on Leora Levy. Then last week, Rick Scott said to me, we're up in Connecticut. We actually think Leora Levy can beat Richard Blumenthal. At that point, that's two people I know what they're talking about. So let's book Leora Levy so people can talk about the upset special. Good morning, Leora. Welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Let's start with your website so people can figure out how to find you. It's leora4ct.com, correct?
Correct. And it's F-O-R, the word for, not the number.
Leora, F-O-R-C-T. Leora, tell us about you and the race that nobody is watching except Rick Scott and Carol Platt-Liebau, two of the smartest people I know.
Well, a few other people have caught on to, I thank you for having me on and realizing that we have a great opportunity in Connecticut to defeat a 37-year out-of-touch career politician. People of Connecticut have had enough. You know, life here is unaffordable. Life here is unsafe. Our kids are being indoctrinated. The invasion at the border has come to Connecticut, bringing fentanyl. It's killed 8 babies in Connecticut. It's killed teenagers. It's killed young adults. You know, we have had enough. Crime is up in our state. Nobody feels safe in their communities. And it's time for change. People know that to change the results, you must change the leadership.
Now, Leora, I'm overlooking the fact that you're a Brown graduate and having you on today, so that we're gonna have to give you a pass on that. Most kids don't know any better.
I appreciate that, but you know, when I was at Brown, I started the Young Republicans Club. I did not just sit and listen to them.
You and I are both graduates of the same year when I was up at Harvard running the Young Republican Club, and that was a nightmare. Leora, just generally getting people to pay attention in a deep blue state like Connecticut is the most difficult part of the equation. But once people begin to realize it's possible, you begin to feel momentum. What do you feel?
It feels great on the ground, and everywhere I go throughout the state, I have Democrats and independents coming up to me and say, well, the Democrats say, don't tell anyone, but I'm voting for you. And independents, you know, they're independent. They know that life doesn't have to be this way. It can be normal again. It can be better again. And they're voting for me. Every single poll shows that I am winning the independent and unaffiliated vote here. This is a single-digit race. He is below 50%. And he is worried. And so is Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer, his super PAC, has started running ads against me here in Connecticut. I outraised Dick Blumenthal in the third quarter and in the latest reporting period, October 1st through 19th, almost by three times.
Leora Levy is running for Senate in Connecticut. Leora, LeoraForCT.com, Leora4Connecticut.com. Leora, in terms of when you got involved in politics, I know that President Trump nominated you to be ambassador to Cuba, and you got blocked.
No, to Chile.
To Chile, I'm sorry. Tell people about your background. You are from Cuba originally.
I was born in Cuba. My family, I came here as a 3-year-old, escaping communism. We came with nothing. I have lived an American dream. I watched my father work hard to make a good life for us. I did go to a good college because I worked hard in school. I was one of the first women international commodity traders on Wall Street. One of the commodities I handled was copper concentrate. I shipped millions of tons out of Chile. That's why I was offered the ambassadorship. That's why President Trump asked me to accept it, because I actually had the qualifications and I speak the language. Yo hablo español. Y los hispanos aquí en Connecticut, ellos me apoyan. That I will win the Hispanic vote. I will win the independent vote. We will change Connecticut. Life does not have to be this way. And, you know, here I am. I'm running for U.S. Senate. If that's not an American dream, I don't know what is.
It really is. And Leora, you're running against Dick Blumenthal, who is maybe the embodiment of everything that's bad about professional politicians who never have a job outside of government. I don't think the guy's ever had a job outside of government. And maybe Connecticut is sick of it, because tell me about the parents. Did Connecticut schools close like Michigan schools and New York schools? That's why we got Republican pulses in those states as well. Is it the parents coming to you?
The parents are coming to me because they know that I support them. We have had all of the politicization with the woke stuff in the classroom. We have even had a principal in my town exposed for only hiring progressives, not hiring Catholics or conservatives or anyone over 30. I held a press conference that very night and had 100 parents standing with me. They know I have their back and I support their children. They kept our kids out of school and in masks for far too long. And we've had the learning loss. We have the low test scores. We have the effects on their development, on young children's development. And they're their children, not the government. And
Leora Levy, good luck, continued good luck. Leora, FORCT.com, LEORA, FORCT.com. Watch that space on election night, America. I'll be back tomorrow. And Canada, Hugh live inside the Beltway. Sometimes the farmer and the Cowboys can be friends. Sometimes the Hatfields sit down with the McCoys, and sometimes those of us from northeastern Ohio will say something nice about someone from western Pennsylvania. This is one of those days. Jeremy Shaffer is running for Congress in western Pennsylvania. Jeremy joins me now. Good morning, Jeremy. How are you?
Good morning, you. I'm doing well, and thank you for having me on.
I hope you're doing better than the Steelers.
Yeah, we're not talking about the Steelers right now. We're looking forward to the Penguin season here.
And the Pirates. We won't talk about any of that. Let's talk about your district. Tell people where you're running, Jeremy, and about yourself, because I met Jeremy when I was in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago and got sick. The only good thing about that night was meeting Jeremy and understanding we got a winner here in Western PA. Tell us about it, Jeremy.
Yeah, sorry if you got sick there. It's been tough. I've been meeting thousands of people myself, been in and out of sickness too here. But
yep.
Yeah, our district is basically it's the north and the west of Pittsburgh, so it's 765,000 people. It doesn't include any of the city of Pittsburgh, but it basically wraps around 3/4 of the city. So it includes half of Allegheny County and all of Beaver County. So it does touch the state of Ohio, and it touches the state of West Virginia a little bit too. And
we'll get our guards up. We'll keep our guards. Your Joe Namath's hometown is in there, right? Has Joe Namath declared for you yet, Jeremy Shaffer?
I need to reach out to him or his family and see if I can get him. But But this is a district that's made up of some of the communities that built the steel and the materials that built America. And it's an area that really can now help flip control of the United States government, because this is one of the top swing districts in the whole country. So it's really critical that we get our message out and that people make their voices known.
The GOP leadership is very high on Jeremy Shaffer, soon-to-be Speaker McCarthy, soon-to-be Majority Leader Scalise, soon-to-be GOP Whip Jim Banks. They all tell me Jeremy Shaffer's a comer. Jeremy, give people your bio. I've seen you. I've met your wife. I think she's a doctor, right? But I can't recall. And then you've got a bunch of kids.
That's her, yeah. So my wife is a medical doctor, internal medicine, geriatrics. We were blessed with 5 kids that range in age from 6 to 17. And I tell people I've been blessed to live the American dream here. I grew up very humble means and ended up here at Carnegie Mellon University, which is one of the schools in Pittsburgh, and got a PhD in electrical engineering, started a small business focused on actually civil engineering topic, keeping our roads and bridges safe. I did that with a friend, and we grew that company to about 40 people, all here in Western PA. Sold it and got very active in local government, was president of a local township. And I've been very active in the local community and just deeply, deeply concerned with the direction of our country. And that's why I've decided to step forward and try to be a voice of reason here to help rein in out-of-control federal government and turn things around.
And Jeremy, how old are you?
I am 45 years old. Yeah.
Perfect. And this is just such a perfect deal for Pennsylvania. Get a congressman who actually can stay for a while and get something done. Jeremy, on your website, it notes that you've got the most important qualification in my eyes outside of military service is coaching youth sports, because that will humble anyone, right? I've watched grown men break down in tears over Buckner plays at first base. Which kids did you do which sports for? I'm always curious about that.
Well, I've done just about all my kids, and it was soccer and basketball. And let me tell you, if you're coaching 4 and 5 and 6 year old kids in soccer, that is a extremely humbling experience.
That's what I got fired from that job, actually, because I blew the overtime. I'm asking you to do one thing. Just drop a bill in to make T-ball out illegal in the United States. Could you do that? Because I think T-ball is torture.
I don't know. I think maybe we should not allow youth sports until they're 8 or 10 years old. I don't know, but no, honestly, I enjoyed probably coaching basketball the most. I coached some kids in more like upper elementary basketball schools.
You see, that's fun. That's the Blessed Sacrament Royals, of which I am a proud alum. That was good. And Coach Buckley, if you're listening, thank you. Let me go back to serious stuff, Jeremy. This is a redrawn district. What is it? D+3? Is it R+4? What is it?
Yeah, the PVI is actually a D plus 0.5.
Okay, very winnable.
It's very, very winnable, very critical. But the Democrats, I mean, they know the control of the U.S. House comes through here. It's if you're watching Pittsburgh TV right now, you're seeing negative ad after negative ad against me, and they're spending over $10 million against me right now. So it's they are coming out with a scorched earth policy. But we're talking about our positive message.
How do you attack a father of many and husband of one, and she's a doctor and you're a successful business person who went to Carnegie Mellon? How do they attack you?
Well, it's all scare tactics. It's linking. It's attempting to associate me with other people. It's saying that I'm going to come after their grandparents' Social Security and Medicare. It's saying that I'm going to send women back to the 1800s, which is crazy. The attacks are just, it's a scare tactic. And they want to talk about everything but the issues that are going on right now, about inflation, about the crime that's rising, about the direction of the country. So for a party that's been in control for 2 years with the presidency, the House, and the Senate, they're not talking about anything they've accomplished because they can't. They don't want to talk about anything they've done. But I'm confident the voters will see through it, but obviously we need to continue to be able to get our message out, so we're aggressively raising money to...
What is the website if people want to make a last week contribution to a guy that we really need to win come a week from yesterday?
Yep, the website is just my name, JeremyShaffer.com, and Shaffer spelled Shaffer. So
you see, that's different from the Northeastern Ohio Schaffers. There was a Shaffer of grade at Warren Kennedy, and one of them went on to be the mayor of Warren forever. But you're spelled Shaffer, JeremyShaffer.com.
We spell it the correct way, is what I like to say.
In Pennsylvania, the chances are that's not true. How long have you lived in Pennsylvania? Were you born there? Are your family Western PA people?
Yeah, so interesting story. So my family's been in Pennsylvania for over 8 generations. One of my great-great-great-grandfathers actually fought in the American Revolution here in Pennsylvania. But I'm what I call a boomerang person. So I was born down in the D.C. area because my grandfather, as so many people in Western Pennsylvania, left for jobs when things went south in our economy here. My grandfather was one of those. And I ended up growing up in the D.C. area by Quantico Marine Base, came back to go to college in Pittsburgh area. And interesting story, the first house I bought in Pittsburgh was 2 miles away from the church that my great-grandfather was a pastor of. So it's like coming home here for me.
Yeah. Which denomination?
It was a Lutheran church. He was a Lutheran minister.
I just got to say, Western Pennsylvania is very sticky. It's sort of like you get glued there against your will, and then you have to root for the Pirates and the Steelers, and it's very sad. But Jeremy, I am rooting for you. JeremyShaffer.com. Help him out, and good luck in the closing campaign. You got like 3 full days of campaigning left. I'm sure it's just pedal to the metal, right?
Yeah. Oh, we're going all out. It's nonstop, and it's going to be a close race, but we're feeling very good about it. And thank you for having me on, you.
Jeremy Shaffer, thank you. It was great meeting you. I'm looking forward to having another freshman-friendly face. There are going to be so many freshmen, I'm not going to know what to do. Cotton is back. His brand new book, Only the Strong, has been featured all week and will be featured all week as we run up to the election because it's an argument for America's national security. I'm begging people to read it and to believe it because we've got to rebuild American defenses. Senator, I want to fast forward from Wilson and not yet to Obama and pause at Jimmy Carter. You write on page 33 of Only the Strong about the deep sense of shame James Fallows talked about for evading the draft. I've long thought that my generation was conflicted over Vietnam. I came in after Vietnam, but that the people who skipped out on Vietnam versus my brother-in-law who fought it had a deep emotional divide they were never going to be able to overcome, and that it manifested itself in politics in an unspoken way. You articulate that. So obviously you've thought about what Carter and the Vietnam era did to us. How did that play into the Wilsonian hostility towards American exceptionalism?
Well, Wilson openly repudiated the American founding and the moral basis of our country. Once you lose that moral foundation, Hugh, as Abraham Lincoln warned about in his great speeches and letters in the 1850s and 1860s, it's not a very far slide into repudiating America itself. And that's what the New Left did in the 1960s, especially leading up to Vietnam. I think it's very important for everyone to understand that in the moment, Vietnam was not that different, not viewed that differently than our ancestors had viewed any other war. There's a sense promoted by aging boomer lefties, probably out of shame, that Vietnam was fought by a bunch of miserable conscripts. That is simply not the case, Hugh. More than 2/3 of the soldiers fighting in Vietnam were volunteers. People like my dad. He was in college, he had a deferment, he became a school teacher, he had a deferment from that as well, but he decided that wasn't for him. There was a war going on, that he was going to volunteer to do his time rather than wait around and worry about the draft. And he did. He served for a year in Vietnam. He's proud of his service. He should be, as all Vietnam veterans did. Ronald Reagan said it was a noble cause, and he was right. But you have young liberals like Jim Fallows, who was, considered, as Kennedy put it, the best and the brightest. He was at Harvard. He was a Rhodes Scholar, and he wrote as a young man about his efforts to evade the draft. It's astonishing, starving themselves, working with liberal law students from Harvard Medical, or liberal medical students from Harvard Medical School, scouring regulations, trying to find ways out of the draft, chanting for Ho Chi Minh on the way to the draft site where they were going to go through their medical testing, all celebrating when they all got registered medically disqualified, even as the doctors knew what they were under. And then Fallows wrote about another bus that came up from places like South Boston, and as he calls them, the white trolls of Boston, who to him looked like lambs being led off to the slaughter. Another word for them might just be patriotic Americans, who maybe didn't want to go fight in Vietnam, maybe didn't even support the aims of the Vietnam War, but understood their country was at war and they were fulfilling their duty. And I don't think that all those aging boomer lefties have ever gotten over the shame they felt for being draft dodgers or draft evaders, and it's colored their views. It certainly hasn't impaired their prospects. I mean, Bill Clinton became president. Jim Fallows, just a year after he wrote those words, became Jimmy Carter's chief speechwriter. But it has colored their views about America and American power ever since.
Some books have an interesting confluence of events around them when they come onto my radio show. When I was reading, I had finished and I had outlined Only the Strong, was the first time I had met on the radio Hung Cao. And Hung Cao came in the United States as a refugee from Vietnam. He's a captain in the Navy, Special Forces warrior, amazing American. He received at Camp Pendleton in an operation that my brother-in-law, then a captain back from his second tour in Vietnam, was partially involved in. And my brother-in-law was at the house when I was talking to Hung Cao, and we talked about that operation. The people who fought Vietnam are still here. They're still with us in large numbers, and they're still proud of their service. But the folks who ran away from it and who have devoted their lives to denying what we were about are still here too, and they're deeply embedded in the media, Senator. I am curious about the media's reaction to Only the Strong, because you're hitting right at the heart of the people who run legacy media. It is the Vietnam generation and the people that they hired.
Yeah, I mean, Hugh, today most of the legacy media is just a press adjunct of the Democratic Party and the progressive movement in America. As I write in Only the Strong, the media had essentially declared war in the home front. You had Walter Cronkite, for instance, saying that the Tet Offensive had been a major disaster, when in effect our troops in Vietnam had essentially destroyed the Viet Cong, the guerrillas in South Vietnam, as a fighting force. You had the New York Times consistently leaking and trying to undermine the war effort. Leader of the Sulzberger family at the time, who owns the New York Times, saying he didn't know what America had to offer the Vietnamese that was any better than the communists. There's this progressive ideology which again has infiltrated throughout our education establishment. Remember, Woodrow Wilson started out as a college professor before he became president. Is learned and inculcated in our cultural and media and political elites. So we shouldn't be surprised that people at places like the New York Times have the exact same views as ideological politicians like Barack Obama.
You know, I know Only the Strong should be on the New York Times bestseller list. I know, given the rollout and the reception it's receiving. I don't know that it will be. They simply manipulate that. But the Amazon rankings don't lie. Go and get it. When we come back, the next time I talk with Senator Cobb, we're going to talk about Jimmy Carter in Nicaragua and Barack Obama's red line and how they are connected, because, boy, are they connected. Go get Only the Strong. Now with United States Senator Tom Cotton talking about this magnificent book, Only the Strong. Senator, last time we were talking about the media, and I don't want to rail about the media. I do every day. I want to talk about Jimmy Carter, a great figure now in America, beloved, aging, almost 100-year-old president who people forget was an absolute catastrophe as president. He was the United States Naval Academy graduate. He's a patriot. He served. I never did. He was a submariner. I never put on the uniform. But Jimmy Carter was terrible for America. He was particularly terrible because he had a, quote, inordinate fear of communism. He didn't understand the world. How did that happen to an Academy graduate?
Well, for all of us who are too young to remember Jimmy Carter's presidency, there's a very simple solution. Just look at Joe Biden and hear him in a Southern accent. And that's what the Jimmy Carter presidency was like. Although maybe I think Jimmy Carter actually may be the one person pleased with Joe Biden in America because he's knocked Jimmy Carter off the list of worst modern presidents. So Jimmy Carter is no one's idea of a radical ideologue. In fact, he's the only Democrat to win the presidency in the second half of the Cold War after Vietnam, after the Democratic left turned on America. And he won in part because he did project as a moderate, sensible Southern governor. But he staffed his administration with far left progressive ideologues, and you can see the results of it with what we get today. Rampant runaway inflation, weakness abroad, Soviet Russia on the march. A very common theme. You saw it with Jimmy Carter, you've seen it with Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, now Joe Biden as well, is the inability to distinguish between friends and foes. You know, I know your listeners, Hugh, are aware of the famous Roman general Sulla, who had engraved as an epitaph on his headstone, "No friend has done me a favor, nor enemy an injury that I've not repaid in full." Now,
it's my favorite funeral quote, yes.
Progressives would say that is crude, it's unsophisticated, it's barbarian, it's backward. And I would say it's not the only guide to American foreign policy, but you know what? It's in a dangerous world, it's not a very bad guide. You know, your listeners, you are you're big fans of Game of Thrones. For us here in America and a few other fortunate countries in the world, Game of Thrones is a fun, distracting fantasy. For most of the world, even today, Hugh, it's called life. That's what it's like in a dangerous world. And you have blinkered
people are living and dying in Ukraine right now because of decisions we did not make in the last year. They are not defended. They are dying because of delay and dithering and idiocy in the Biden administration because of things we did not do.
And the inability to support our friends like the Somozas in Nicaragua. Now, they were nobody's idea of a good liberal Democrat, but they were pro-American, and what came next was worse. And there's a direct line to that with Barack Obama. You know, look at Barack Obama overthrowing Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, withdrawing support, which led directly to his collapse. Again, Hosni Mubarak's no one's idea of a good liberal Democrat, but he was pro-American. And what came after him was worse, and it undermined us not just in Egypt, but throughout the Middle East.
And I want to underscore here the worst part of the Carter presidency, and there were a lot of bad parts. Nicaragua was it, but it was Iran. I was sitting in San Clemente every day with Richard Nixon at the Elba of America watching on TV, and I would watch with RN, the mobs. And RN was aghast because he not only was a friend of the Shah, but he understood what Iran meant to America as one of the two twin towers of American power outside of Israel, along with Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. Jimmy Carter gave it away. And he gave it away to radical ayatollahs who are still attempting to kill Americans today on this soil because of the Donald Trump's killing of Soleimani. Iranian regimes are trying to kill your friends and my friends on American soil today. And that goes back to Jimmy Carter betraying an ally. Do
Yeah.
Democrats not understand the consequences of betraying allies?
Well, I think the most ruthless ideologues do, and they do it on purpose, Hugh. People like Barack Obama when he withdrew support for Hosni Mubarak in Egypt, when he ran what could only be described as a partisan campaign to ostracize Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and other opponents of his rapprochement with Iran. Because remember, these Democrats are at best deeply ambivalent about America and hostile to American power. So if you are a nation that has aligned yourself with America, you are at best suspect. Iran claims it's part of the Axis of Resistance. What are they resisting? They're resisting America and America's influence in the Middle East. And almost by definition, that makes them worthy of trust. Now, with Iran, Barack Obama also believed that America was the source of our tensions with that country going back 43 years. He believes that we were the one who has contributed to all of the conflict between the United States and Iran, and therefore he was going to redeem America of its sins against Iran. He was going to be able to welcome them into a new embrace with America, which would also allow him to bring lower Israel and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and other Arab friends that we have in the region, which would allow America to withdraw from the region. Now, again, he didn't view that as a failure. He looks at the result of his foreign policy as a smashing ideological success when most Americans, just like most people throughout the world, look at the smoking ruins of that foreign policy and hang their head and weep.
Senator, I want to pause for a moment on Iran. You were the first to step up against the Iran deal and send a letter which just sent the New York Times into rage and the left into rage, saying, hey, Ayatollahs, you can sign whatever you want. It doesn't count. If you were ever to become president or advise the president on what to do about the Iran deal, I hope you will submit it to the Senate so it can be rejected and restore American constitutionalism to international order, because it was the abandonment of the treaty-making power with the Iran JCPOA which underscored how corrupt the left has become in the refusal to follow the rules. Those rules were designed by the framers to protect us from idiocy in the Oval Office. I applaud wholeheartedly, and only the strong, your diversion into this is what the JCPOA did. Do you think we can ever get back to the constitutional norm?
I do, Hugh. There's a lot of play in the joints in our Constitution. It's not illegitimate to have executive agreements between our president and the head of state of another country, but those are almost always on minor administrative matters, things like delivery of the U.S. mails or the status of U.S. forces in a friendly nation. No president until Bill Clinton had ever thought you could have a major nuclear arms control agreement with a hostile country without Senate ratification. And that's what he did with North Korea in 1994. It didn't solve the threat of North Korea's nuclear program. 12 years later, they detonated their first weapon. But it gave a template for Barack Obama's even more reckless nuclear deal with Iran, which again didn't solve or end Iran's nuclear program. It's now much further advanced than it was when Joe Biden took office. But it did allow him to pursue his ideological ambition to enter a kind of grand rapprochement with Iran, to apologize and atone for America's sins against the Ayatollahs, and hopefully to withdraw entirely from the Middle East by elevating Iran and weakening countries like Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Now, my apologies to Bob Corker if he's listening, but he was a useful idiot in this process. Because some Republicans don't understand why this matters. Does our party now understand? People know I'm a Republican. Does your Senate colleague understand we have to stop acceding to the abuse of executive power and national security?
I believe so, Hugh, and as I explained in Only the Strong, the Senate has been one of the great bulwarks for American sovereignty over the years. If it wasn't for the Senate and our power to ratify treaties, we would have had Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations, which would have committed us to an insane global network of alliances, forcing us to go to war in places where we had no vital interest whatsoever. You would have had international treaties to ban the trade in arms, infringing upon Second Amendment rights. The Paris Climate Accords would have been a binding treaty that would have devastated America's energy, jobs, and driven up the price of gas and electricity even higher than they already are. So the United States Senate has always been a bulwark of common sense, reflecting the common sense of the American people against the ideological ambitions of Democratic presidents.
When we come back tomorrow, the red line. In the meantime, go and get Only the Strong. You will be happy you did. Send it to everyone. And remember, when you vote this week and next week, if you're voting early, vote Republican. We are in a dangerous time, and we have to get the Republican majorities back. Thank you, Senator. We'll talk again. Side of the Beltway, I want to correct myself. In the previous segment, I said there were 500,000 double ballots to be counted in Israel. It's actually 570,000. I just learned from the Jerusalem Post these are overwhelmingly considered to be, quote, the soldiers' vote and usually favors the right. Expect Benjamin Netanyahu to be the prime minister of Israel within 21 days. Joined now by NBC News' Steve Kornacki, the man in khakis. He's also the host of a brand new podcast series, which I'm going to load and listen to on one of my long trundles because it's about one of the most memorable nights of politics that I've ever broadcast, the night of 1994 when Newt led the revolution. That's, in fact, the name of Kornacki's new podcast series, The Revolution. Good morning, Steve. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning, Hugh. Good to be here.
Now, you and I have talked a lot about 1994 in the past. I was working for KCET in L.A. at the time, and on television, the red light comes on or the green light comes on. You say, whatever comes to your mind, if it was a fight, they'd have stopped it. It was a slaughter, Steve. Why did you choose now to do 1994, the podcast series?
Yeah, I think we now have a generation of hindsight, and I think it really stands out almost even more. There's the shock of the moment you're kind of describing, but, you know, here we are. We could be days away from seeing the power in the House transfer from Democrats to Republicans. If it does, it'll be the fifth time, you know, since 1994, basically the fifth time in the span of a generation or so that the House has changed hands. And when you look before 94, obviously, it had been 40 years, 40 consecutive years of one-party control, Democratic control of the House. So I really view 94 as kind of it's a pivot point where, you know, the House went from being just dominated by Democrats. I mean, Republicans weren't even close in that period. It's not like they ever got, you know, 5-10 seats away from majority. They were just absolutely buried in the minority. And I think what Gingrich undertook, you know, in the 16 years or so leading up to 1994 was kind of a project to redefine the Republican Party, to redefine the role of the minority party in Congress. I think he was one of the very first to understand the potential of the nationalization of media that was kind of playing out with the rise of cable news and eventually the Internet. Talk radio was part of this as well. And to put those pieces together to nationalize congressional politics. And for his project, 94 was the culmination of it. But I think for the country, it was the start of it. I think we've been living in a much more nationalized political environment since. The definition, the contrast between the two parties is a lot clearer. And it's resulted in, as I say, we've had, you know, potentially 5 swings of control of the House in a generation. And for 40 years before that, it was unimaginable.
1994 is, for me, about halfway through my adult life, if you count. I got my first campaign experience at the age of 18 in 1974. 20 years later, I'm doing media television in a precursor to a cable show on PBS in L.A. And this happened, and then we're 20 years later, or 30 years later, and could happen again. The difference, and Steve just put his finger on it, for the first time in 1994, an election was nationalized by Newt Gingrich. We moved from the Bob Michael era to the Newt Gingrich era. Newt came out with the Contract for America. Rush was, in fact, taking over the airwaves at that point. He was doing his Rush to Excellence tour. I had started a talk show in the afternoons on the weekends, but at nighttime on TV. And everything changed because the election was nationalized. For the first time ever, people didn't vote for, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics are local. They voted for party over person. I just had Jeremy Shaffer on, Steve Kornacki. He's running in Pennsylvania on one of the western Pennsylvania seats. And, you know, he's going to win based on national environment and national news story, not because of local stories about Jeremy Shaffer. At least that's what I think. Do you think this election is as nationalized as anyone has ever been in an off year?
I think so. And I mean, when you look at we're looking at potential turnout here of 120 to 130 million people in a midterm election. You could just go back to 2014, only 2 midterm cycles ago. The number was 85 million, much lower at some points, even in the not-so-distant past. And I attribute almost all of that not to what's happening in people's local communities per se, but to what they're consuming kind of nationally. people consume nationalized media now. We have obviously this issue they consume maybe on the right, maybe on the left. There's as much conversation between the sides as there used to be. There may not be, but I think people are consuming through whether it's television, whether it's sort of social media, internet. They're consuming national storylines, and it's motivating them. It's got people interested in politics who 5-10 years ago didn't give it a second thought, and it's resulting in just these astronomical turnout levels in elections that I couldn't have imagined 20 years ago.
And I cannot wait to hear how Newt uses the national media, because I forget stuff. Even though you lived it, you forget stuff. But 30 years later, let's go back to 1994. You got your news from the three networks and CNN. That's it. That's all you had. And there was Rush on the Monday through Friday slot, and there were people like me on the weekends, and there were shows like PBS, Washington Week in Review, or Life and Times on the West Coast that did politics. But generally, your media was limited to the big national networks, Steve. How much do you put down the polarization to the rise of the internet? And by the way, I don't think polarization is bad. We're moving towards a parliamentary model underneath a Republican model, a small r Republican, and it's fine to have a parliamentary model. The Democrats are about to get kicked in the teeth, and that's the parliamentary model working in the off here. But when did the switch to other than big legacy media occur?
Yeah, I think it one of the stories we tell in here, and it's a small in the grand scheme, in the ocean of media, it's a small thing, but I think it's significant. Newt gets to the House in January '79, and it's March of 1979 that for the first time ever they turn a television camera on in the House chamber, and that was C-SPAN. That was the rise of, gavel-to-gavel coverage of the House proceedings.
Brian Lamb, we love you. Go ahead.
And Brian Lamb is part of the podcast. Got a great interview with him in there. But
did you really? Brian is the smartest guy about American politics, not named Kornacki.
I'll take that as a high compliment, and he tells some great stories in there. And what you see is that Newt was the first to recognize it, because you had all of these members who'd been there 20, 30 years who it was a nuisance to them. Newt saw value in claiming time on the House floor when the chamber was empty. Everybody was going for the night. They were at their dinners. They were at their fundraisers, whatever they were doing. And Newt would claim time, and he had a small group of allies too, Vin Weber, Bob Walker from Pennsylvania. They'd claim time, and they recognized that it didn't matter if their colleagues were ignoring them. They were talking to whoever was watching on cable television on C-SPAN, and they started to develop a following that way. And one of the other things that they started to do is they started to kind of create dramas. They started to create stories. There's a famous one we tell in here from 1984, where they got so under the skin of the House Speaker. You mentioned him a minute ago, Tip O'Neill. Tip O'Neill actually ordered C-SPAN cameras to go off of them. He had the power as Speaker to control the camera. And, of course, that was just feeding right into what Newt was trying to achieve, because here he was trying to get attention from that national media, a young backbench member, and now he's got the Speaker of the House's attention. He's got the Speaker of the House kind of playing around with the rules a little bit because he's so irked by him. And then it leads to this confrontation on the House floor with every House member present as the cameras rolling from the national media. And Newt actually baked successfully Tip O'Neill into this explosion where O'Neill is essentially reprimanded on the spot by the Democratic House. It's just, in the moment, today it might not be as shocking as it was then, but in the moment
it was very shocking then. I can't emphasize to people,
media,
it's a revolutionary moment. 1994 is a revolutionary moment, captured in Steve Kornacki's new podcast, Revolution. I want to pause for a moment on Mr. Newt. He deserves a biography by someone like Walter Isaacson, someone who actually, because he is such a monumental figure. I think I like to test this theory on you, Steve. I think he also invented the politics of combativeness with television anchors in his exchanges in the 2012 primaries with John King at CNN. That's really the first time. We saw Ronald Reagan say, I pay for this microphone. We saw George Bush talk about the whim factor. But, I mean, Newt really took it to John King and laid open a path which 10 years later, everyone treads.
I think you had mentioned this to me, too, because it was on my mind. And unfortunately, with this podcast, we kind of stop in 94. But when Newt's story doesn't stop in 1994. And yeah, I think that moment, I mean, you see, and I wonder if Donald Trump himself saw in that moment kind of a bit of a roadmap because of what Gingrich tapped into. I remember this was 4 or 5 days before the South Carolina primary in 2012. Gingrich was buried in the polls. Looked like Romney was going to win South Carolina, and the Republican primaries were going to be done. And that debate moment you're talking about, I think, moved the polls about 30 points in 4 days in Gingrich's direction. And he was tapping, you see the seeds of this, I think, in the 70s, 80s, 90s in the story we're telling here. But he was sensing that there was this sort of national media, mainstream media, elite media, however you want to define it, that there was a sort of some resentment of it, that there was a backlash to it, that there were ingredients for that out there. And you could see in those earlier days he was starting to tap into that a little bit. But, yeah, 2012 and then the environment we're in now gave it a whole new level. Let's
go back to 1994 and Steve Kornacki's new podcast. If you're killing time this week, and a lot of reporters are, because you can't trust polls at this point, you can't trust any, you got to wait until Tuesday night. I remember then Congressman Chris Cox coming into my L.A. studio and whispering to me off air, if anybody says to you they saw this coming, they are lying. And Chris, of course, was close to Newt, and he was as gobsmacked as anybody out there. The potential for surprise ought to have gone away because polling ought to be better, Steve Kornacki, but I don't think polling is better. I think polling is worse. What do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the problems with polling, and there are a lot of questions around polling right now, and one of the problems is we've had such big misses, 2016, 2020, and even in 2018 there were some significant ones. I think a lot of media organizations, a lot of academic organizations that traditionally sponsored these and put resources into them have backed off. So I think that's just one of the issues right away is we don't have a lot of the data that we used to have. But I think, and there was an article yesterday by Nate Cohn, who's really good with this stuff in the New York Times, talking about how he is seeing in his polling, they're trying to do it there, they're seeing non-response bias. Again, it's not just this struggle to get anybody to pick up the phone, anybody into a poll. That's a big enough issue. They're finding a specific problem with sort of a Republican, Trump-friendly demographic, non-college.
My audience will not talk. My audience will not talk to pollsters.
There it is. Yep.
Yeah, that's it. They just won't do it. They believe that they are part of legacy media's machine. Kornacki's not. I trust Steve. And Steve, I got to remind everyone, you can find this at iTunes, at wherever podcasts are, right? It's called Revolution. Now, I have to issue my warning, though. You've always promised to stay away from radio. You're the best guy on TV, and you've always said you're going to stay away from radio and leave me alone in my little domain where I've lived forever. But now here you are doing podcasts, Kornacki, and then NBC's going to come to you and ask you to do a radio show, and you're going to tell them no, right?
I love the podcast because it's the audio version of doing a book. You can really take your time on it. You can really go through the archives. We've got some incredible, rich archival material in here. And yeah, I think your day job is safe. Don't worry.
All right, I just wanted to guarantee. I think that's a promise. I think it's enforceable. There's consideration. Kornacki's not starting a radio show, but go get his podcast on 1994. It's called Revolution, and it's going to get me through this week. Steve Kornacki, always good to talk to you, Steve.
Thanks a lot.
Really, he's one of the last honest guys in politics. Meaning, I don't know if he's a Democrat or a Republican. He's just always right. He's always on the nose. Steve Kornacki.